Hello, everyone. So let's talk about creating an alternative competing culture. So I'm sure many of you are well aware of the fact that culture is upstream from politics. It has become a mantra on the right that politics is downstream from culture, but we haven't been practicing it as much as we should have. And I can go on scolding about this, but no, I feel like we have to be talking about solutions. So here are a couple of my solutions. The first solution is empower the artists we already have. Already, we have a bunch of artists who I would say don't have mainstream success. I would say, I would say that those on the opposite side will always find some kind of mainstream success, even if it's by a couple extra thousands. So obviously, we have a lot of news organizations, both formal and informal, that are really popular right now. After all, when it comes to politics, we are really having a lot of energy for it. So I feel like if we could really mix the two together. So in other words, have these news organizations interview these artists, promote their work, and not just interview them only when they have a new product out, but also interview them when they're working on something, or just interview them on a leisurely basis. I think that would be fan flipping tastic. Not only that, but also partner up with them with certain products. I think these news organizations should also sell some of these products, and honestly, it would be fantastic. The next step is, of course, funding these artists. Of course, we do have a plenty of affluent people on the right, and I feel like they do back a lot of politicians, but I wish that they would also back a lot of these artists, fund these artists. So I'm going to be taking an example out of Stuttering Craig's example from Side Scrollers. He mentioned this many days ago, and he said something along the lines of if he had $100 million, you would be distributing it. You break it up and distribute it to multiple game companies and let them create something magnificent. And I think that's what we need to do. Even if you have one affluent, you could say, what's the word? I'm forgetting the words now. One affluent person, you could say, um, who backs who would back a multiple projects, take 100 million, divide it into small amounts, and fund it. Fund these small movies, these small TV series, these comic books. Fund these musicians, empower them. Not all of us have the finances to back our fantastic ideas. So that would be fantastic if we have more affluent people focusing on the culture as well and funding it, the culture. So, of course, the next step is to create from scratch. Eric July said something along the lines of the fact that many of us keep looking at these industries as if it's the only go-to, and I agree. We only look at it as if they're the only true forms of art and nowhere else. We look at it as if there's only one stage, there's only one spotlight, there's only one red carpet, but in reality, there's plenty of them, and they come in different sizes. But let's just say there is only one stage, one red carpet, one spotlight. Well, we should be creating from scratch. We can create our own stages, our own red carpets, our own spotlights. We need to stop only looking at towards Hollywood and all these other industries as if they only have the answer, but we can learn a lot from them, but we don't have to just only go to them to solve everything. You know what I'm saying? So we should be creating from scratch. Here's a great example: Angel Studios. They are focusing on creating, I would say, magnificent Christian content. If you guys look at their current trailers they have, it's just so magnificent. They are funding a bunch of shows, distributing a bunch of content. It is fan flipping tastic. However, they cannot carry every single idea on their platform. Certain ideas do not mix with their values, and I'm okay with that. It would make no sense for me to march up to Angel Studios and say they need to create some kind of TV series in which you have hot women fighting or something like that. Scantily clad women fighting. it would make no sense of them at all to accept that. So we should be creating multiple alternatives to focus on different tastes. And here's a great example, another great example, which is fan service. I'm sure many of you know that fan service these days in video games, comic books, and all that stuff, it's heavily scrutinized, even though at one point it was becoming mainstream. Obviously now it's heavily frowned upon, and now you just told, oh, you want this type of stuff? Well, you're a bad person. You're a really bad person if you want these things. And obviously, the solution should be picking up the torch from where these other developers and artists left it and continuing, because that's what we should be doing. For years, I remember every day waking up to some story about how anime is being censored, or how it's being toned down, or how in recent days that video game companies are told they're not allowed to have certain kinds of adult themes, you know? And let me just say that at the end of the day, it's up to us to be funding, and not just funding, but also creating these alternatives. You know, okay, fine, you won't get a bunch of fan service anymore. Even on the lighter side of the fan service spectrum, you won't get that anymore. Okay, we should be funding it. We should be creating it. We should be promoting it. Stuff like that. We should be doing it. We should be picking up the pen where other people abandon it and continuing from there, paving a new path. So there's a great example. But anyways, we need a bunch of record labels. Okay, what else? A bunch of film companies. We need a bunch of streamers as well. I know a lot of people may not know this, but a lot of streamers are heavily biased. Okay, and even if it's a light bias, we do know where they lean, and I know that many of you guys will obviously look at these streamers. Some of you guys may not even have these streamers, but I would say many people look up to these streamers, and I get it. These are mainstream streamers. However, they do lean a certain way, so they can have a certain movie or a TV show that's heavily biased. And what is the solution? Create more streamers. Create streamers in which it's not only focused on politics, but if it were to house some kind of political show, it does have a right wing leaning. You know what I'm saying? It's like we should be creating spaces in which where it's possible for us to at least have certain stories if those stories so happen to be created. You know what I'm saying? But for the most part, we should have streamers that focus on entertainment first. And I feel like that's imperative. Also, do not give up on cinema. It is strange that these days a lot of us are focusing on cinemas, and we should not give up on it. A lot of Hollywood folk are just focusing on streaming right now. I mean, it is the business model after all, but we can focus on both. You know, we can have one eye focusing on the cinema and the other eye focusing on streaming. And here's the thing: when it comes to these movies, obviously we can't afford to make to make to make streaming movies only. So what we should be doing is making movies for cinema and then put them on streamers. But of course, for cinema, we shouldn't ignore it. We should just embrace it. Right now, there's a lot of room for creating just cinematic masterpieces, and plenty of people, especially Angel Studios, they have been utilizing the cinema platform for some time, and it's wildly successful. And even last year, there were a bunch of right-leaning documentaries that really did a good job at the cinemas. So don't ignore the cinemas, embrace it. We need a lot of movies, a lot of great movies that could really mean something for someone out there. And it doesn't only have to be political. It can be escapist. It can be something that's promoting your values in a positive light. So don't give up on it. And here's something fun to point out. Some of the people who worked on the Unplanned movie, I'm sure some of you guys may know the movie. I have the DVD, but I haven't watched it yet. Um, well, they now work on a distributing company. They created a distributing service for certain shows and movies, and I think that's wonderful because I remember when the Unplanned movie was coming out, and it was a controversy. It was age restricted heavily, whilst other shows and movies were obviously downplayed with their age restrictions. So creating your own distributor is one thing because obviously not everyone wants to distribute your movie, and it can be something about a mild topic. And I remember Jeremy Boring uh, saying this, that when it comes to for certain movies, they won't be able to talk about trans issues. Like now at least you can talk about like the abortion issue or something like that, but they don't want to talk about the trans issue. It's something so divisive, and obviously most distributors just won't be focusing on that. But it's good to have new distributors. It's good to have just create new distributors, really. Anyways, this video is just going way too long, but anyways, for creating a mainstream, I would say, a piece of art, anything. It could be a portrait, it could be music, it could be TV show, it could be a multiple set of movies, an epic franchise, really, that really features a bunch of merchandise and a bunch of spin-offs. Well, we should be focusing on what works. When it comes to writing stories or creating stuff, sometimes we're going to get lucky, but sometimes we already have the formula to focus on, and I think we should be like learning from the past and creating something in which a lot of people can indulge on. And I feel like the next thing is to also don't be uber divisive. Not every product needs to be uber divisive. Hollywood can afford to be uber divisive. They'll always find a way to find money regardless. They have been divisive for some time now. And as Eric July said, we fund them, they don't fund us. So at the end of the day, they don't want our dollar. They're pretty much fine with being divisive at times. So, okay, fine. Okay, fine. Fine. Let's create something that isn't divisive all the time. I get it that politics is going to be divisive, but if you're not focusing on politics 24/7, that'll be fine. Like, let's just say if we have a movie about a handsome prince slaying a dragon and rescuing a princess. Obviously it's that itself has become culturally I would say, what's the word, just frowned upon, but we could really make it mainstream again. We could really bring back having heroic male characters. We could really do something that Hollywood is lacking right now. And we could also have really strong female characters too. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is that we could really, really do what Hollywood isn't doing, and we could really do a good job in doing so. So, um, anyways, okay, I'm just losing my track of thoughts. So anyways, we should be creating things that aren't all the time uber divisive. And obviously, yes, there will be works that are going to be touching upon certain subjects, but not everything needs to touch upon certain subjects. You know what I mean? And that leads me to the next one. It's not everything needs to be about politics. There's nothing wrong with creating documentaries. There's no problem having shows like Mr. Bertram. But the problem is that if you only focus on that, only focus on political comedy, and I would say only politics as culture, it doesn't really grow as much. Put the values first, and yes, some things can be political. I'm fine with certain things being political, but not everything has to be uber political and uber divisive. Anyways, what else can I really say? I had an extra thing to say, but I just forgot. Oh, um, okay. So I would say, it's tripling down on what we have been doing and what works. Don't ignore the culture, and I would have to say all the things I said really matter. From funding to creating from scratch, to promoting, to doing a bunch of things. All of these things matter in paving a mainstream culture and a bunch of subcultures as well. So let me know what you think. Bye.